Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed for a review. That's right, we're taking a look at the AOC 24G2 SP today, which is the successor to the highly popular AOC 24G2 that we've been recommending for some time. The 24G2 was such an excellent 1080p 144Hz gaming monitor for entry-level buyers, and even to this day continues to have periods where it's clearly the best value of any 1080p monitor on the market. So hopefully the 24G2 SP continues in that tradition. What has changed between the 24G2 and the 24G2 SP? Well, not much if I'm honest. The main difference is the upgrade from a 144Hz maximum refresh rate to 165Hz on the new model. The fundamentals are the same. This is still a 24-inch 1080p IPS monitor with adaptive sync tech and all the usual features. It's also priced very competitively despite being a new product at below $200 US. In fact, right now it's cheaper at some retailers than the older 24G2. I should also note here that the original 24G2 had two variants, one using a Panda panel and another using a BOE panel. The new SP model is most like the original Panda panel variant, and I suspect what we're getting here is a newer or slightly revised version of that panel, but we'll see how all models compare throughout the testing. In terms of design, there's not much different between the 24G2 and 24G2 SP, which is a good thing because the 24G2 had almost perfected the budget design in my opinion. Nothing overly premium about this monitor, mostly a standard plastic construction, but it gets the job done. It appears well built, and crucially, it doesn't waste money on unnecessary features. What it does have is a great stand that's height adjustable among other ergonomic controls, which you don't get with every sub $200 monitor, and I feel is definitely worth paying for. It's quite a sturdy stand too, more so than some high-end monitors I've recently been testing. The one annoying omission is the lack of a directional control for the OSD settings. The face buttons along the bottom right edge are quite annoying to use, and I wish the design was revised to use a directional pad instead. But this seems like a straight reuse of the design, which I guess has saved AOC some money. The OSD itself is pretty basic, few useful inclusions like a crosshair and so on, but nothing amazing. As for ports, very standard set of options with one DisplayPort 1.2, two HDMI 1.4 ports, and even VGA, which is basically useless in 2022, but it offers rare compatibility with ancient hardware. Unfortunately, the HDMI 1.4 ports are limited to just 1080p 144Hz instead of the full 165Hz, so it would have been nice to see the HDMI 2.0 standard used instead, though a minor issue on a budget product. Response time performance is next up, and we have the usual set of 4 overdrive options from an AOC monitor. While the panel is quite similar to the original 24G2 iteration, it appears as though the overdrive tuning has been tweaked somewhat for the new panel and its 165Hz refresh. With that said, the default option is overdrive off, which is slow and not a configuration I would recommend anyone use. When moving up to weak overdrive, we get a small improvement in performance, but I still don't think this setting is how most gamers would want to use the monitor, especially at its maximum refresh rate. The medium mode further improves performance, but I think we can go one better here and move all the way up to strong overdrive. With this setting active, the monitor is capable of an 8.35 millisecond greater gray average at 165Hz, which isn't the fastest performance we've ever seen, and there is a bit of variance in some speed between specific transitions. Some rise times are actually quite fast and even have a bit of overshoot present, but a lot of the fall times are a bit lethargic, and this is also the case when inspecting cumulative deviation. Perhaps a bit more tuning here, even using the highest setting, was in order. At lower refresh rates, the AOC 24G2 SP is usable with strong overdrive. At 144Hz, the monitor is slightly faster than the original 24G2, also at 144Hz, but not significantly so. Around 100Hz or 85Hz, the amount of overshoot begins to get noticeable, and especially at 60Hz, you'll see obvious inverse ghosting in motion, which isn't ideal. At these low refresh rates, I'd recommend dropping down to the medium mode, which has less overshoot and better cumulative deviation, or even weak overdrive for that matter. This means the 24G2 SP does not have a single overdrive mode experience, which isn't the end of the world with a budget product. It also was the case with the original 24G2, where the strong setting was optimized for higher refresh rates and medium for lower refreshes. However, it is a regression from the other 24G2 variant with a BOE panel, which did have good performance across the refresh range. So from that perspective, it's a bit disappointing. Looking at how this monitor stacks up against a range of similar options, the 24G2 SP has a pretty average response time. It's quite similar to the 24G2 from 2019, but re-optimized for a higher refresh rate. Meanwhile, the BOE variant from 2020 is notably faster, so moving back to this Panda panel is a regression for speed, though it does have advantages in other areas that we'll get to. As for other options, well, we have the BenQ EX2510, which is also a fair bit faster than the 24G2 SP, but it's roughly $50 more expensive, at least for the new EX2510S variant, which also has a 165Hz refresh rate now. The nearest in price is the Pixio PX248 Prime S, which comes in with 21% faster response times, but also high overshoot, so it's only a small improvement. On average across the refresh range, the 24G2 SP is similar to AOC's other monitors, but it varies in overshoot. The 2020 BOE model is the best of the three with the least overshoot, while the Panda panel options are closer, and it appears this new SP model has pushed overdrive a bit higher to more cleanly hit 165Hz. It ends up faster than the PX248 Prime S, but still slower than a more premium product like the EX2510. For cumulative deviation, the 24G2 SP could use a bit more optimization here in my opinion. While it's not that different to the original 24G2, the updated BOE model from 2020 is substantially better. I wouldn't class the SP as having modern IPS response times, whereas I do think that's the case for the BOE 24G2, although it was always difficult to find that exact variant as the Panda panel model made up the majority of units shipped. Comparing at the same refresh rate, the 24G2 SP is similar to the other 24G2s, but with higher overshoot when looking at 120Hz. When moving down to 60Hz, the 24G2 SP is similar to the 2019 model, but with higher overshoot again, and really neither of these Panda panel models are as good as the BOE 24G2. The major advantage that model has is much more consistent performance across the refresh range, which is most noticeable at lower refresh rates. Input latency is pretty much where you'd expect from a 1080p 144Hz monitor these days. The processing delay is below 1 millisecond, which is what we like to see. And then we get modest latency from the medium refresh rate. The top of this chart does include a few 240Hz monitors and some premium 1440p displays with better response performance. For power consumption, the 24G2 SP is an efficient monitor thanks to its size and panel technology, so this is a complete non-issue, and if anything, it's better than most competitors. The monitor, it does support backlight strobing, but the feature isn't very good. Even using the strongest MBR setting, there are clear multiple images on the screen due to strobe crosstalk. The response times of this panel simply aren't fast enough to support a clean strobing experience, so I wouldn't use this feature. The 24G2 SP does support a wide color gamut with 95% coverage of DCI-P3 in our testing, which is actually well above what AOC advertises on their website, but it is consistent with both prior models of the 24G2. In total, we get 72.5% Rec 2020 coverage, which again is very similar to other 24G2 models, and a mid-table result all up. Many other 1080p monitors in this class are sRGB only, such as the EX2510, which is why they have such low Rec 2020 coverage, so the fact that we are getting some wide gamut support here is a nice bonus. As for factory calibration, AOC does quite a good job here, delivering a good color temperature and flat 2.2 gamma, which is only slightly off the correct sRGB gamma curve. This all up leads to okay delta E performance for grayscale. However, the gamut is left unclamped as usual in the default mode, so there's a bit of oversaturation when viewing standard SDR content like your desktop or YouTube videos. It's not too bad here and helped by a good color temperature. In comparison to other monitors, grayscale performance is strong and very similar to the original 24G2 and better than the revised BOE model. Color checker performance is also good and in line with other 24G2 models, though it's beaten by the EX2510's sRGB only performance. The 24G2 SP does have an sRGB mode, but it's practically useless as it locks brightness controls to quite a high level, which most people won't find usable. It is able to improve saturation performance, but there's no point talking much more about it as I would never consider using it, and seriously, AOC locking brightness controls is really stupid. However, the display is easy to calibrate and to get performing nicely as an sRGB monitor. We used CalMan software here and the results are excellent across the board. There is also some capacity for calibration and use as a P3 monitor. I don't think the gamut coverage is quite there, but it certainly gets close and it's better than a lot of other 1080p monitors out there. Patreon and Floatplane members can download the ICC profile we create during calibration. The Panda panel variants of the 24G2 both have decent brightness in the 370 to 400 nit range, which again well exceeds what AOC advertise at just 300 nits. This is a key difference to the 24G2 BOE model, which tops out at just 270 nits, one of the worst results we've measured among gaming displays and maybe a tad insufficient for some users. However, with this monitor, high peak brightness also comes with high minimum brightness. At 100 nits here, I definitely would have preferred users to be able to set brightness to be lower. Contrast is another strength of the 24G2 SP. Even though this is an IPS panel, its contrast ratio is higher than average, reporting in at 1461 to 1, which is strong, though still far behind VA panels. This is better contrast than the Pixio PX248 Prime S by 22%, and far better contrast than the AOC 24G2 2020 model and BenQ EX2510. This particular display is well optimized for picture quality compared to some other models. Viewing angles are good on this display, better than what you'd find on TN or VA equivalents, which is sometimes in a similar price range to this monitor. Uniformity was also okay, not an outstanding result or anything, but pretty good with quite a consistent central area, which is what we're looking for. Lastly, we have the Hub Essentials checklist to measure how AOC are advertising this display to ensure everything is accurate and also to see if minimum performance standards have been met. Unfortunately, AOC get a few deductions here, most notably for falsely advertising the bezel size of their monitor. On their website, they use this image to advertise the 24G2 SP, which appears to show the display extending all the way to the outer plastic bezel. In reality, this is not the case. There is a secondary bezel inside the plastic edge, which you will have seen throughout this review. AOC's advertising gives the impression that the bezels are super thin, when this isn't the case. The monitor does have just, well, normal bezels. In better news, the 24G2 SP is well advertised as far as color hardware goes. If anything, AOC undersell what the panel is capable of. They also advertise factory calibration, which I think is fair given the performance I recorded. However, AOC also advertised 1 millisecond response times, which is highly misleading in my opinion, as the actual average performance of the panel is around 7 milliseconds, and the fastest transitions I measured were more around the 2 millisecond mark, even using an outdated testing methodology. While AOC does say the 1 millisecond response times are MPRT, not grey to grey, I don't think this can be used as an excuse because buyers would interpret that metric to mean the panel is faster than it actually is. I was glad to see no mention of HDR on the features or spec page though, which is welcome as the 24G2 does not have the required hardware for HDR and doesn't really support it. Most monitors below roughly $800 do not have suitable HDR hardware. The AOC 24G2 SP is what I'd call a successful product update. I've seen other manufacturers in the past do silly things like make the new version notably worse than the old one or drastically raise the price, but AOC haven't done either of those things here. The new SP model is basically the same as the old one, but with a slightly higher refresh rate and the same great price point of just $180 US. The discussion is a bit complicated because there were two variants of the 24G2, the original one, which is most similar to the 24G2 SP, and a 2020 variant that used a BOE panel. That BOE version was faster in response times, but didn't have the same great color quality as the original Panda panel model, so it was a bit of a trade-off. At the time, I called the second 24G2 variant a side grade and still feel that's the case, so I think on average the 24G2 SP stacks up well regardless of which model we're talking about. But what is very clear, especially in 2022, is that the 24G2 SP is a 1080p gaming monitor that's mostly focused on image and color quality rather than response times. We're getting an excellent contrast ratio for an IPS, good brightness, great factory calibration, and even some wide gamut capabilities, which all lead to a panel that just looks very nice to use. However, the speed on offer here is nothing amazing. It's not terrible, but response times don't keep up with the best IPS monitors of today, which I think is forgivable at this price point. Speaking of price, I think $180 US is still an excellent position for the 24G2 SP, and really, this is just a replacement for where the 24G2 used to be. There hasn't been a heap of price movement in the 1080p market over the last year, so most options are still sitting in the $150 to $200 range as far as, 1080p 144Hz-ish IPS goes. I would certainly buy this over any TN or VA option around that price, and nothing screams out to me as better value based on what I've tested. Hopefully at some point we'll see these sorts of monitors more around $150 or lower. Anyway, that's it for this review. a review on Monitors Unboxed. Yes, we'll be doing a few of these from time to time. But anyway, if you're interested in supporting the channel, we do have links to our Patreon and Floatplane in the description below, not just for Monitors Unboxed, but also Hardware Unboxed as well. So really appreciate all the support. It allows us to buy monitors. We've also giving you some perks there. You can sign up and get access to our Discord community, behind the scenes videos, other cool stuff. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.